Last time I asked if you could hear which drum machines were the two mega expensive classic vintage original Roland TR-909s and which one was the cheap Behringer clone. And now you want to know the answer. And the short answer is yes. But there's a long answer as well, and it includes why you can hear the difference and even what you can do about it. So let's look into that first, and then I'll end the video with the correct answer for each sound. So far, 700 people have watched the comparison video. A third of them looked at the whole thing. That's well over 200 people. 34 of those filled in the form. But another third watched the video, listened to a few of the samples, and then stopped. So I'm going to guess that that was about 200 plus people who were interested in knowing if they could guess which one was the RD9 and realized they couldn't and closed the video. I also think most people who listened to all the sounds but didn't fill in the form also did this because they couldn't tell which one was the RD9. So that means most people can't tell which one is the RD9. But if we look at the answers, things get more interesting. With 12 questions, each that had 4 options, one being, I don't know. If there was no difference in the sound, we would expect the answers to be a bell curve with a peak at 3 or 4 correct answers. And although we get a peak at 3 correct answers, an even bigger peak is at 7 correct answers. I think this is 2 bell curves overlapped. One peaking at 3 correct answers are people who didn't know what to listen for. The other is a bell curve of people who have read the discussions about the RD9 and therefore know what to listen for. But we can point out that not even that helped completely. Nobody had all correct answers. Even the best ones only got 8 out of the 11 individual sounds correct. That's enough for us to say that yes, there is a difference you can hear, but it's not that obvious. To know why, let's listen closer to some of the sounds. One of the most famous sounds of the 909 is the bass drum. It's punchy and in your face. A is the sound that really sticks out. It's the darker one, but B and C sound really close. And C is the RD9. And only 6 people got that correct. Most people picked B, which is my TR-909. So we can reasonably conclude that Behringer got the kick drum right. So why is A different? Well, this is probably a combination of 2 factors. One is the limits of analog circuitry and the other is age. If we look at the circuitry of the 909 kick drum, there are 4 potentiometers in it to adjust sound parameters, but there's nothing else that can be adjusted. That means that things like the pitch and decay of the different parts of the sound are entirely controlled by the values of fixed components like resistors and capacitors. And they aren't exact. In fact, a quick look at the TR-909 circuit board will show you that pretty much all of the resistors have a small gold band on them, showing they have a 5% tolerance. That's plus and minus 5%, meaning that in theory, one 909's tuning could be 10% off from another one's. Now, mostly you won't get these extreme differences. The 5% are what the resistor manufacturer guarantees. But you will have differences of a few percent, and that still means that no 2 909s will sound exactly the same. Component values can also drift even further away from nominal values with age. This is particularly true for capacitors, and a capacitor that gets lower capacitance because of age can, for example, raise the pitch of an oscillator. Another sound that stands out for how many got it wrong is the rim shot. Almost 60% picked C because that's a brighter, higher pitched sound. But that's a red herring. And now we need to talk about 909 revisions, because not all 909 are equal. There are 4 revisions to the sound generation, with the first and earliest being revision 1. The first change they did was changing a capacitor in the bass drum, and this is called revision 2. The service manual says that it expands the tuning range, but most people agree that the change also made the bass drum punchier. I don't have a confirmed sample of an uncompressed revision 1 to compare with, unfortunately. It seems most revision 1s has gotten modded to be a revision 2. It's a simple change to make after all, and most people think it sounds better. And the similarity in sound between Behringer and my TR-909 shows that Behringer also chose to implement that change. Revision 3 raised the cutoff on a high-pass filter for the hi-hats to remove unnecessary frequencies. I can't hear any lower frequencies missing, and that's not surprising, because the capacitor was originally just there to filter out DC components. So it was a high-pass filter, but it filtered out things below 0.7 Hz. The revision 3 change moved the high-pass filter to 700 Hz, so it indeed only removes bass frequencies. The change is likely made to remove digital noise. More on that later. More importantly, revision 3 also changed the frequency of the rim shot for more realism. This is the most obvious difference between all the revisions, and this is why people picked my 909 on the rim shot sound. It's the last one. Because mine is a revision 4, while the second 909 here belongs to Cryptout and it is a revision 2, so it doesn't have these changes. And we can therefore conclude that the RD9 is emulating a revision 2 909. And that's also the one internet generally thinks sounds the best, so that makes sense. Revision 4, lastly, is supposed to have changed the emphasis of attack on the toms. That change is in the tom noise circuitry, which I don't really understand, and frankly, I can't hear the difference. While the bass drum and the rim shot were sounds that few people got correct, most people got the mix correct, the whole pattern. And indeed, it's B that is the RD9. And the fact that most people got that correct leads us to the conclusion that although the difference isn't that obvious, there is a difference there if you know what to listen for. And the most common comment was that B sounded brighter and more punchy, and I agree, it does. So what's the difference? Why is the Behringer clone brighter than the original? A common guess was age, but lowering capacitor values with age should have the exact opposite effect. The difference is instead again circuitry dealing with noise. The TR-909 has a 6 dB low pass filters at 15 kHz on all the sounds, and on the main outputs they in addition have a 6 dB low pass filter at 7 kHz. This is supposedly to deal with digital noise from the processor board, and the Behringer RD-9 does not have these filters. I doubt that the 15 kHz filters that are on the individual outs make that much difference. 15 kHz is a really high frequency. But the 7 kHz on the main outs are definitely audible. The 909 famously sound different on the individual outs than the main out. And the sounds I'm using here are all done from the main mono out to make things as equal as possible. So if you want your RD9 to really sound like a 909, slap a 6 dB filter on it at around 7 kHz. And there are also already people on the internet that in fact are modifying their RD9s by soldering on capacitors on the outputs to make them sound more like a real 909. The conclusion is that yes, if you want the 909 sound but you aren't made of money, a Behringer RD-9 is a perfectly good replacement. The sounds themselves are so close to a 909 that it's really hard to tell the difference, if you can at all. But they skipped the noise reducing 6 dB filters on the output. Why? Well, you have to ask Uli, but leaving out the 6 dB filters has meant that people call the RD-9 bright and punchy, and that's a good thing. So arguably, you could say that the RD9 sounds better than a TR-909. Now, this is not the only differences, of course. The RD9 is not a one-to-one clone of the 909. So there is the possibility of me making more comparisons if you want to. I have been asked to see how the shuffle and flam functions match up with the original. That could be interesting maybe. I could also make sound comparisons from the individuals outs if you want to. And I could make a video of my general impression of the RD-9. Tell me what you want in the comments. And now, the 6 people who subscribe to get the answer can unsubscribe. Or keep subscribing. This year I'm planning to make a video on the internals of the OSC Oscar and why Behringer gave up making a clone. Maybe that could be interesting. But until then, here are the correct answers.